Okay, we're going live. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the legislative update this week. My name is James Schrimsher. I'm the vice president and the legislative chair for the Washington State Fraternal Order of Police. We're going to go around the room and do some introductions, and then we'll get started. So, Marco, you're top of my screen.
Thank you, James and Michael, as always, everybody who could come here and attend and view our legislative update on Saturday morning. I know it's early, but we appreciate you all being here. Before we start, just a couple of things I think it's important to bring up. And, the first is, we've all seen what the events that have gone on in Memphis. And, it's very important that we all understand that this is an appalling act that isn't indicative not only of, the brave men and women here in Washington who risk their lives every day, but also the vast majority of the 800,000 law enforcement officers in this country that go out there and make a difference in their communities and do the right thing every time because they know that integrity means everything in our profession. So I think it's important that we all remember that and, appreciate all of you who, go out there and serve honorably. The second thing is just really quick, a point of personal privilege that I am pleased to announce that we have entered into an exclusive agreement with Blue Line Benefits to offer retirement medical for law enforcement here in Washington. So we're going to be rolling that out here in the next 2 or 3 weeks. We're very excited about this, and it's going to help out our retired officers with the retirement medical. So it's a great opportunity that only the FOP is able to provide. With that, James, go to the next person that's here.
Okay, so next on my screen, and I just want to echo what Marco said about Memphis. That is not indicative of how we do business here in Washington State, and it's not indicative of a peace officer professional. So with that, Bill,
Talking to me?
Yeah, talk to you.
Sorry. You're all broken up. Bill Swan, East Side Vice President. Sorry about that.
All right, looks like we have a couple of local lodge presidents joining today. First one on my screen is Mark Coleman. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Mark?
Good morning, everybody. Mark Coleman from Lodge 40, the Renton Police Guild Lodge.
Okay, next on my list is Holt. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Holt?
Good morning, Holt Woodhelm, Spokane Lodge President.
Steve, you're next on my list. That would be the Steve Dills.
Steve Dills, Washington State Fraternal Order Police Secretary.
Chad?
Chad Petersick, State Lodge Chaplain.
Jeff?
Jeff Anaya, State Treasurer.
And the infamous Jack.
Jack Symington, Washington State National Trustee, coming to you from beautiful Arizona where the sun shines, blue sky, 75 today.
And then we have one of our labor attorneys on here, Mr. David. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jim David. As James pointed out, I'm one of the attorneys that work with the labor side of the FOP in the state. Thank you.
All right, Michael, you want to introduce yourself and take it away?
I am Michael Transu, and I do the governmental affairs work in Olympia and Washington for the Washington State Fraternal Order of Police. And good morning, everybody. As always, I appreciate you all taking the time on a Saturday morning to listen to an attorney and a lobbyist talk about the legislative session. So I really appreciate your time sitting and listening to us in the mornings on Saturday. So I'm just going to go down our agenda and kind of talk a little bit about, what the legislature did this week, what they're looking at, kind of next week. And then we'll go from there, and I'll pause, at each point and see if anybody has any questions, or as James, as you and I like to say, put a finer point on things. So starting with House Bill 1025, for those of you who don't know, that is Representative Ty's qualified immunity bill for, 2023. That bill was heard this past week in the House Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee. We, the FOP, signed up in opposition to that legislation, and then submitted written comments that were consistent with, our statement in opposition to the bill. We just felt like signing up opposed and submitting written comments to the committee on, our opposition to the bill was a much better way to approach that bill politically, and kind of, let the other groups and let other folks, talk publicly and testify against the bill. As you can probably well guess, there was, a lot of support for that legislation. Community groups and WCPA were, in favor of that legislation. A few questions from, the dais from Representative Walsh and Representative Graham, the latter of whom talked about some ride-alongs she's went on over there and in her district, and talking about her opposition to the legislation as well. One of the things I would point out that was brought up that I thought was really instructive, and it's kind of come up behind the scenes a little bit, but last week really overtly, and it's how the state left themselves out of the bill. The bill is directed to local law enforcement and peace officers, but the point was made that the state really has no accountability in that bill, leaving state patrol, corrections officers, fish and wildlife, DNR and the like out of the bill. So there was a lot of discussion about, perpetual lawsuits and things like that. And, as our statement reads on our website, we just, didn't think that bill this year had the proper balance with, basically the agencies themselves being more on the hook than the officer being on the hook. So I'll talk about what we did testify on and what we suggested as an alternative to House Bill 1025 was when we get to House Bill 1445. But again, most law enforcement groups, cities and counties, all opposed, and then including ourselves, and then the community groups and others in favor of the bill. So I'll stop there, James, see if you or Marco want to add anything, and if there's nothing else, I'll go on.
Yeah, thanks. Give me 5 seconds on this bill. I fielded some phone calls from members who received some information from outside the organization about our position on 1025. As Michael made it very clear and plain, we opposed it. A lot of times, not to get into the weeds too much, but when you only get a minute to testify, I think it's more meaningful and impactful to submit written testimony that you just can't get out there in 1 minute of testimony. I mean, you're going to get one soundbite, but for the record, if you submit written testimony, that is way more powerful and impactful, especially on an important topic like this. That being said, our comments were based off of our general counsel, who is Brian Moran, a former AUSA, his comments and input. He was very beneficial to providing our written comments. So we don't just say, no, we're opposed. We actually give them a very articulate reason, and Michael does a very good job of delivering it. And like I said, I agree with our approach on 1025 because we want everything why we oppose it on the record. So that being said, Marco, you have anything to add?
No, I agree, James, and I too fielded some phone calls and you know it's quite simple when you read our press release that went out to all of media and what we put out as a testimony in writing. It spells out our position very you know very well.
Okay. All right. What we did testify, the other bill we did testify on that was heard the same day in that same committee is House Bill 1445. And I just call that the Patterns and Practices bill. And this is a bill that's prime sponsored by Representative Drew Hansen, who I think I mentioned on our last call, worked with us on the legislation, and quite frankly, took a couple of our suggestions. The important one is that there was some language in the bill that talked about acts by peace officers and looked like it could be the basis for a lawsuit and against officers, and you know, kind of inadvertently, I guess, you know, that language was in there. And as we suggested to him, as others did, you know, there's a certification, decertification process in Senate Bill 5051 that was adopted by the legislature a couple of years ago. And that's the legislation that, you know, for purposes of, you know, officers and lawsuits, we suggested that, you know, that process is the process we need to use, not a separate process under a patterns and practices piece of legislation. The other thing it does is it really, you know, kind of focuses more in on the culture of agencies. It parallels or asks the Attorney General to make certain that they consult with the U.S. Department of Justice to make certain they aren't overlapping with anything that might go on at the U.S. DOJ. And so that was a piece of legislation that we came out in support of, and hopefully that's something that continues to move along. One of the things that we aren't that pleased with within the bill, but we don't have a really good answer other than it's vested in the Attorney General's office, and that's, you know, kind of a place where we've talked about on these calls, you know, law enforcement overseeing law enforcement, and, you know, that sort of thing sometimes doesn't, you know, settle really well. But again, we don't really have, and there's no really good answer for another agency to take on that role for agencies' patterns and practices. So, you know, it's just one of those things that, again, we just don't have a real good answer for. So it's, you know, it is, you know, it is in the AG's bailiwick, and we expect the bill to move out. We also made some suggestions on including the Criminal Justice Training Commission and the Office of Independent Investigations into what I would call a statutory stakeholder list, so that it's certain that the OII and the CJTC are engaged in any patterns or practices discussions that the AG's has. And this bill follows the model use of force policies. So this bill directs the Attorney General to develop and publish model policies for local correction by agencies on things like accountability systems, specifying model practices for receiving complaints on serious misconduct, you know, and those sorts of things. So we expect that bill to move along, and we hope it does. And again, it's one of those ones that we think is a much better answer to getting at culture and getting at training in agencies, rather than a bill like 1025, which is a qualified immunity bill. So I'll stop there. And that bill was also heard last week on the 25th. So I'll stop there, James, and see if you have anything to add on patterns and practices.
No, I think you're good.
Okay. Marco, how about you?
Appreciate it, Michael. Very good explanation. Obviously, you know, with us, you know, we want to thank Rep. Hansen because took our suggestions. took the focus off of the officer and more of the agency culture where it should be and not on an individual officer. So we do appreciate that. And I'm sure that we'll be in discussions with Rep. Hanson's with any additional tweaks that might need to be made with that as it goes forward.
Hey, Michael, I do have one comment. Like 1025, I fielded fewer calls, but there were some questions, and there appears there is negative information coming out about our position from other groups. Just remember, we're accountable to you. We do our research. We take positions. They're not just to take positions or to gain political advantage. We take those positions because it's the right thing to do, and is from feedback from you. And when we take a position, we've done our research, we've done our homework, we've consulted with professionals, and I'll keep using Brian's name today because he was a former U.S. attorney and a former AG, and he's probably the only attorney in the state of Washington that is in a position to comment on how this process works, and from both sides, from the AG side and from the U.S. attorney side. So that unique experience of our general counsel, Brian, led us to our position. So thanks.
Okay. Next on our agenda is vehicular pursuits. There are many, and one of the other things I want to say before I get off 1025 is we were the only group to be supportive of that. The cities, the counties, and the other law enforcement groups were all opposed.
That 1445, not 1025, Michael.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
1445.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, on vehicular pursuits, lots of bills introduced, taking it all the way back to reasonable suspicion for everything on the one end of the spectrum. And then recently introduced were two bills, one by Representative Goodman and one by Senator Lovick, to address pursuits more broadly. And to really just create a working group like we did with the canine groups. And Dills, you'll remember in 1054, how there was proposed to be a lot of restrictions on canines. And because law enforcement groups were all over the board, there was a work group that was established at the Criminal Justice Training Commission to come up with some model canine policies that worked really well. And I think Steve would tell you that it was a good process and resulted in some, really good model policies for canines. And the idea on vehicular pursuits is to mimic that sort of process. So it sets up a work group at the CJTC, lots of things to examine in terms of vehicular pursuits, lots of data to be collected so that the legislature can, do a data-based and informed decision with a lot of good background work. The other thing those bills contain is a fix-it ticket or a grant program for local governments. And so rather than for non-movings, for things like taillights out, headlights out, those sorts of things. And James, you're going to know more about this because it's a system that you're familiar with, but you basically get a fix-it ticket, and rather than, have a penalty and a civil infraction issued to you, you get a fix-it ticket, and you get to go in and get whatever piece of equipment on your vehicle needs to be fixed.
Hey, Michael, I think you're mixing up the traffic stop and the pursuit thing. Right? Because the traffic stop's the one that has the fix-it ticket. I didn't put that on our agenda.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry. You're right.
Yeah. So if you want, Michael, the pursuits, okay, the pursuit bills, they're like Michael said, there's numerous pursuit bills. You're all good.
No. So on vehicular pursuits, I'm sorry, you're right. The other thing that the vehicular pursuit bill contains is a grant program to local governments for technology and pursuits.
There you go.
Drones, ALPRs, GPS, dart guns, and that sort of thing. So I'm sorry. Thank you, James. So that's what's in the vehicular pursuit bill that are being heard next week. I'll talk about that when I talk about the schedule. My gut tells me that that one of those bills will move forward. My gut also tells me that there will probably be some tweaks around the vehicular pursuit bill edges. There's a bill that's introduced to make eluding a peace officer in terms of an auto theft, a Class C felony, and that would be something that could be pursued. So I think you'll see some tweaks around the edges in the vehicular pursuit bills. I believe one of those will be the vehicle rather than some of the other bills that have been introduced. So, and on the House side, that bill was introduced by Rep. Rule and Rep. Robertson. And then on the Senate side, that bill was introduced by Senator Levick and Senator McCune. So both of those bills have a pretty decent level of bipartisan support. So those are, I think, some bills that we will be in favor of as they move through the process. And with that, I will stop and see if there's anything, James, you want to add around the edges.
No, I think you're I think your gut is pretty spot on. I'll go one further. If I had to bet, my gut tells me that whatever happens with pursuits is going to come from the House. Our official position, this is another thing that there was some misinformation out there or misleading information, whether direct or whether purposely or not, that we were siding with no pursuits. That's not accurate. What is accurate is this. We support everything that's in the legislature right now around pursuits. We believe there needs to be a tweak to the law. We also believe that there needs to be a working group to further improve both policy and legislation. So both areas that were proposed need to happen together. That's our belief. And I think that position, we're the only law enforcement group that has that position. We don't want to die on a certain hill. We want them all to pass. We want tweaks and we want a working group, pure and simple. So we're going to work on both of them and we're going to see what happens. And I've learned a long time ago to trust Michael's gut. And so that's pretty sound information. Marco, you got anything to add on this one?
No, just at the same thing. Fielded some calls on that with some misleading information. With people thinking that we didn't support those bills, we encourage our members and people to continue to call us, and we appreciate them calling us on those when they hear that misinformation. And attending these types of meetings are important as well because it sets the record straight, so you're not hearing it from someone else not involved in our organization.
All right. Next item we have on our agenda is Senate Bill 5463. And this is a bill that is sponsored by Senator Levick. And it regards juvenile interviews. And it's something that we've had our eye on. And in particular, I know this is something that, Marco from his community has a lot at stake in terms of, interviews with juveniles. And how they are conducted and under what circumstances they're conducted. This bill kind of opens up a little bit the juvenile questioning that goes on and, allows some outs if there is an age-appropriate statement on the applicable rights. There's some exceptions inserted about if the juvenile indicates that their statement would be exculpatory in nature. And then there's another outright exemption if the peace officer seeks only to clarify or locate others involved in the crime or recover evidence. So we think those are good words, but we think that they need to be, I think at least part of them, as I recall, Brian's email and of a couple of days ago is that it just needs to be moved up into another section so that it can so those exceptions can occur more in the front end of the process rather than waiting more in the back end. So with that, bill we support for sure, and we're going to ask Senator Lovick to see if he can provide a couple of amendments and support a couple of amendments for us to, as the words in my world go, make the bill a little bit better. So with that, I'll stop and see Marco. I know you had some conversations with Brian on it, and see if you had anything to add.
No, I appreciate that, Michael. Yes, and again, Senator Lovick, we appreciate him and what he does, because if we're bringing this bill to light, and I think with a few tweaks, it is definitely something that we are going to be able to get behind. It's got and the few things I heard was just like especially from Brian is Moran is just moving the section, keeping the language, moving the section a little bit to the front end. But it's going to be a bill that we're going to be able to support for sure.
Right on. It's not scheduled for a hearing yet, but again, we'll work with Senator Lovick and see if we can get that thing in a better spot. The next item on our agenda is, and this is where James on the agenda, it should be House Bill 1633. For those who are listening, if you got your agenda in front of you, not House Bill 1663. And this is a bill prime sponsored by Representative April Connors over in Marco's neck of the woods. And it basically, the short title is Creating a Homes for Heroes program. And it directs the Department of Commerce and Behavioral Health Crisis. It is a program that works really well down in the Phoenix area. And if anybody ever wants any more detail on the program, please contact me. In the Phoenix and Tucson facilities, about 50%-ish of the folks who come into those facilities are law enforcement and first responder drop-offs. Both facilities see about 30,000 Arizonans a year. And law enforcement drop-off turnaround times are less than 10 minutes. So when a peace officer comes in and drops somebody off at one of those facilities, they are out and back on the street within 10 minutes or less. So really good program, and it's something that several in the law enforcement community and the business community supported. Although it's not kind of a tradition, one of those traditional policies that you would see such a diverse group of proponents. But yeah, it's a really good piece of legislation. And again, if anybody wants any more details, feel free to give me a shout. On the Blake fix more broadly, we talked about this a little bit last week. You have the complete spectrum of bills out there that have now been introduced in the legislature. You've got a bill that goes back to pre-Blake and felonizes possession, adds knowingly into the legislation. I don't think I've seen it yet, but the Substance Use and Recovery Advisory Committee, or SURSAC, is going to come forth with some recommendations that will largely decriminalize drug possession. So those are your two sideboards. And then in the middle, there's been a couple of bills introduced, 5536 by Senator Robertson, and then 5467 by Senator Solomon. Interestingly enough, I would note that our legislator of the year in the Senate, John Lovick, is the number 2 on both of those bills, the Robinson bill and the Solomon bill. And they take a little bit different of an approach. The Solomon bill basically, well, under the Robinson bill, basically officers are encouraged to offer a diversion program when they encounter a person they suspect is violating the possession laws, but before an arrest is made. And then under Solomon's bill, if a suspect is arrested and then pleads guilty, a judge basically sentences them to undergo substance abuse treatment. And if they refuse, they are sentenced to a minimum of 40 to 45 days in jail. On the other hand, if they agree to go to and complete treatment, the judge vacates the decision. Both of the proposals, center on treatment over incarceration. And, neither goes as far as I just mentioned on the two bookend sides. So I think both of those bills in the middle are the ones that will move forward. And we'll see what comes out the backside on the Senate. And as James mentioned, on the vehicular pursuit side, we'll see a bill come from the House to the Senate. And on the Blake side, we're going to see a bill go from the Senate to the House. And again, as I've mentioned on these calls for both the House and the Senate, a lot of that is just related to a division of work and making certain that, one body isn't taking, all the brunt, if you will, on considering and moving through a particular piece of policy legislation. So both Chair Goodman and Chair Dinger work really well together. And, particularly on these really, important policy bills, having them split that work, I think it makes it harder for us because now we're, following both sides of the rotunda, but for their purposes, I think it works out really well. So I'll stop there. What I will say, there's also for the Solomon bill, Senate Bill 5467, there's a companion to that bill in the House, and that's House Bill 1613. And that bill is sponsored by Representative Alicia Rule. You may remember from up north in the Bellingham area who we supported. And then it also has some decent bipartisan support. Representative Mossbrucker, who's the ranking member on the Community Health and Public Safety Committee, and Representative Shavers from the Whidbey Island area are co-sponsors on that legislation. So both of them have some really decent bipartisan support. And we're gonna, work both of them and work to, see what comes out of the Senate best. So with that, I'll stop and see if there's any comment on the Blake fix bills.
Nope. I just want to add, the reason I added the facility thing on there, because what we're being told is that, Blake is not just one bill. It's going to be a layered approach. And so part of those 23-hour facilities and providing funding for those 23-hour facilities is part of the Blake fix. So Michael, that's why I went ahead and added that on there.
Yep.
And I, quite frankly, I fielded a couple of questions this week from members about the 23-hour facility and how it tied into Blake and why it was important. So that's why it's on the agenda today, because it is part of the Blake fix. It's going to give them an alternative to throwing them, we can still make that arrest, but you have that carrot stick approach of, hey, we can take you to the 23-hour facility, you can get some treatment maybe, and provide them a pathway to a more positive interaction other than the traditional action of, okay, we're arresting you, we're taking you to jail and getting admitted into the criminal justice system.
Yeah. And I'll just go one better. I think there's a lot that the legislature is doing with regard to behavioral health, which when I use that term, behavioral health means both substance use and mental health. There's a lot that the legislature is doing to get folks into treatment, authorizing capital dollars to have these types of facilities built. The 988 system that Representative Orwell and Senator Dinger championed is another place where we're going to see that integration with behavioral health treatment. And hopefully, and I think the goal is that folks begin to call 988 instead of 911. And for our purposes, what a good thing to, have law enforcement not be the focus of behavioral health calls. So yeah, again, big package of stuff. And we watch that stuff mosey through the legislature that, will help folks get into treatment and, make our jobs a little bit easier and have us focus on the public safety needs that we need to focus on, and, have others in the community that are more appropriately trained to deal with the behavioral health stuff. So next item on our agenda is statewide independent prosecutor, House Bill 1579. Recall, this is the bill that we've, continued and will continue to work real closely with the community groups. Regrettably, House Bill 1579 is just it's just a little bit of a redo of the status quo, for lack of a better way of putting it. It vests the Office of Independent Prosecution in the State Attorney General's office. And as we've talked about previously, for our purposes, in the Attorney General's office, there remains that conflict of interest for making charging decisions on peace officer use of deadly force. And it really doesn't change the current status quo on local prosecuting attorneys being able to make those charging decisions. It puts a little detail in the bill on the types of conflict analysis that prosecuting attorneys are required to go through in terms of determining whether or not they want to charge in a particular use of force case. It does put some sideboards on this office that's created in the Attorney General's office. But for us, it really is just from a policy perspective, a bridge too far. And at a really high level, the Attorney General's office is just not a place where we think the Office of Independent Prosecution ought to be. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a little bit for us as well, police overseeing police, and the Attorney General's office represents the State Patrol and the Fish and Wildlife folks and the liquor and cannabis folks and the corrections folks. So we really just think there needs to be a place outside of the Attorney General's office or any prosecutorial office that works closely with law enforcement. We supported the bill to place this office in the executive branch, and we've never on these calls gotten down into the weeds on, the constitutionality that local prosecutors talk a lot about in their discretion under the case law that's interpreted Article 5, Section 11 of the Constitution that, basically talks about, and the judicial decisions over the years have provided this level of prosecutorial discretion at the local level that prosecutors continue to rely upon, in addition to things like, this is what my local folks elect me to do. And I think I'm in the best position to do it. So we're opposed to that bill. I know that there is some efforts to try to make it a little bit better for the community groups. And that they're, working with the prime sponsor to see if they can get that bill in a little bit better of a spot for them. We'll see how their efforts go and whether or not it's something that we can support as the bill moves forward. But, right now as introduced, it's just a bridge too far for us. So I'll stop there and see if James or Marco has, anything to add. And like Marco said earlier, this is also one of those ones where we've leaned in to our general counsel to get some advice and some workings on how that Office of Independent Prosecution should and must operate.
The only thing I would add is that we'll have a press release coming out next week outlining a little bit more detail of our opposition. And that I just want to highlight what Michael said. There's efforts to continue to work on that bill, and we are opposed to it as it was introduced. So again, we appreciate all the hard work that people do. We appreciate our collaborations and being able to bridge those gaps between community groups and law enforcement. We've had very valuable, meaningful relationships developed over these couple of years working together on this bill and others. And even though we don't agree, we're all still working together and we're still doing things as you should, solving problems together.
I like that. Thank you. The last thing on our list, and I'll just touch on it, is the budget update. I went through last week, all of the things that were positive law enforcement recommendations in the governor's budget. And I just wanted to let everybody know we put together a letter to the governor, and it is off to the governor's office, thanking him for including such large appropriations for things like officer wellness, for things like mobile crisis response teams, just, a really decent amount of funding, as I mentioned, last week in the Gov's budget. And I don't think it's something, that you see every year. And again, I think there's just some good stuff in there, millions of dollars. If you add it up, it's probably somewhere in the, almost 25 to $30 million range over the next biennium, on a lot of different things for peace officers and grants for wellness programs. So we put together a nice little letter to the governor and shipped it in, thanking him for including all that funding in his proposed budget. And we're going to advocate in both the House and the Senate as they continue to develop their budgets to include that level of funding on those sorts of things and add things in like the Homes for Heroes program that, Representative Connors is putting forward, and fund those sorts of things to, help with recruitment and retention and, getting a diverse group of folks into the, peace officer profession. So I would just know that. Before we get to the good of the order, just a couple of things I want to talk about really quickly, James, in the last few minutes. There's a lot of bills up for public hearing next week that we will be following. Senate Bill 5226, which requires the Department of Corrections to prioritizing open active warrants of persons who have violated the terms of their supervision. Training for tribal police officers, which we're going to support, is up next week as well. There are a couple of bills doing that. One's grant, and then one, those are companion bills, but providing tribal officers the ability to get into the CJTC and like local enforcement agencies, get a 25% grant from the CJTC for those tribal officers that are coming in to training. There's a bill that was introduced by Representative Ramos on authorizing flexible work hours for general and limited authority peace officers. Also a bill, that we're going to support. One that is up that I'm certain everybody has a personal interest in, but nothing that we're taking a position on. Senator Lubbock has proposed reducing the blood alcohol concentration level from 0.08 to 0.05, a la Utah. So, it's something that's out there that, again, that you all should be aware of, but again, nothing that the FOP is going to take a position on. I would just note for those agencies who do seizure and forfeiture of assets, there's a bill out there, House Bill 1385, that talks about the civil forfeiture procedures. Again, nothing I think that the FOP is going to take a position on, but something that for those of you who do seizures and forfeitures in your agencies that y'all should be aware of. There's a bill 5299 sponsored by the minority leader, Senator Braun, and the Ways and Means Chair, Senator Rolfus, that provides off-duty officers with an assault 3 protection. So if somebody is off duty and it's directed and it's understood that the person is a peace officer, that'll constitute an assault 3. There's also a bill out there regarding limited authority peace officers and agencies. And as you all know, those are the folks that traditionally have to take a back seat to all of the general purpose law enforcement agencies in terms of the seats at the CJTC. And this requires that limited authority folks get to their training within 12 months. So unless they have a LEA waiver, for lack of a better way of putting it. And it also requires or allows for a waiver if they have been, I think it's within the last 12 months, they were a federal, now I guess I'd call it a federal agent that are out there that have some, some basic training. So that's something that, that's out there that certainly we can support. And so just, those are the equivalency academy that folks get to go through. And again, this is folks who have been special agents and successfully completed a BLEA course in another state. But again, good bipartisan support as a Braun Rolfes bill that carries a lot of weight. And the fact that you have the Ways and Means Chair supporting it is a really good indication of whether or not it'll get funding in the budget to do that. So we talked about vehicular pursuits and independent prosecutions, and those bills are up for next week. And then, yeah, that's it. And then a lot of the vehicular pursuit bills are up next week. I don't know if they're going to be, ready to move out next week, but they are scheduled. And as they continue to get worked, through the process, we'll keep track of them and keep reporting that progress on these calls. So as I mentioned before, one of the things I caution everybody on is, the legislature is as fluid as a place as you'll ever be. And when I provide this information on Saturday mornings, I always caveat it that what I just told you in the last hour is subject to change in the hour that afterwards. So things just move really quickly and morphs and changes. So just kind of bear that in mind as you take this information in. But things do change really quickly in my world. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions from anybody.
No questions, but we're getting close on time. So I'll start and close out. Just a few comments on independent prosecutor. When we talk about, when Michael says police investigating police, he's obviously talking about the conflict of interest that the Attorney General's office has because they represent law enforcement groups at the state level. There's still a place for independent prosecution or independent investigative teams around the state to conduct those very professional, very thorough investigations into officer-involved shootings or officer-involved deaths. So, moving forward, there's always a place for that. I hope that is very clear. The other thing I want to add, we started this broadcast off talking about what happened in Memphis, how we don't agree with it. It's not indicative, right? But a lot of things that we support just show how professional we really are here in Washington. The support that we're starting to get in the terms of funding, seeing regional academies coming online, those kind of things only add to our professionalism. And so I'm very proud to represent this organization in Olympia. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. And as always, if you want to get more into the weeds, so to speak, about these things, we have a Tuesday morning meeting where we discuss these in depth and keep things up to date, a little bit more impersonal, a little less formal. So if you want the link to that meeting, please get a hold of your lodge president and they'll be able to get it for you. So with that, we'll go around the room. Marco?
As always, Michael, very informative. James, thank you, and everybody else. Let's just keep in mind that as we move forward, things move quickly. Things move quickly when it comes to the legislature. So always get a hold of your legislative team if there are questions or concerns about anything. That's what they're here for. A lot of our members that really try to get involved and understand the process. So reach out and really consider if people aren't here on watching today, get them the information and to this link and watch it, and obviously watch it on our YouTube channel too, WAFOP TV. It's going to be placed there. So again, thanks everybody for taking the time on Saturday.
Around the room,
Bill?
Chief.
Yeah, Bill, you got any final parting words of wisdom?
No, I'm good. Thank you guys for your hard work.
Chad, any parting words of wisdom?
Nope, all good. And I'll echo everybody else. Thank you too for all the work you do over there. I know it's tiresome, so appreciated.
Thank you very much. Jeff?
No, I'm good. Thank you guys for your work.
Dills?
Nope, I'm good. Thanks.
Jack?
Uniform of the day, shirts and shorts, t-shirts and shorts.
Thank you. Okay, Mark, you came on the screen. Got anything?
Thank God I'm FOP. Thanks a lot for the work.
And we'll finish it off with Holt. Holt, you got anything from Spokane?
Nothing today. Thanks, guys.
All right, so that ends today's legislative update. We'll be back next Saturday, as always. And again, thank you for attending.
Thanks, everybody.